Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Osquery Office Hours. It is September. Here in the Boston area, it's gray. Hopefully the weather is nice wherever you are. Announcements since the last meeting. I don't know if it's an announcement, but as a highlight, we have Mike Arpaia here today. So welcome back, Mike. Any announcements from the rest of you?
No announcements.
Okay. Well, next section is sort of an open section for questions, issues, PRs, anything people want to discuss.
Mike, did you come here to discuss something?
No, I'm just loitering, basically. I mean, I've been writing increasingly more C++ and like back from Rustland, I think. So I was like hacking around in the Osquery code base and figured I would start coming to office hours just to say hello.
That's awesome.
Okay. Well, first agenda item we have is the ePPF deprecation.
Yeah, I wanted to bring this up again. I know we discussed this. It was maybe about 2 months ago, or maybe even 3 at this point. And the plan that we came up with at that time was to make the announcement and then that we were going to deprecate it and then provide 6 months before actually doing the deprecation. And we haven't made any announcement, and I know that Alessandro especially was very eager, but I know Stefano also in various work is blocked on ripping out the old ePPF stuff, and so I'd love to get the announcement out there and use that to start our timeline, and also to as we discussed at the time, to use that for Fleet to kind of go to our customers and make them aware of what's happening, and then hopefully probably motivate Fleet to build some replacement functionality for the BPF stuff there. But we need to get the announcement out first. Unless there's been like a change in what people want to do here. I think where we had last left it was Alessandro was gonna help to write a little bit of a technical explanation of why the deprecation needed to happen, and then I was gonna help get them announced and then get it out to our customers and work on a plan for replacing it. I see Alessandro's not here, so possibly the best thing to do here is bring this up in chat. Stefano, I don't know if you have any insights to share. Maybe this just needs a follow up with Alessandro, or any thoughts?
No, I'm not saying this is the reason. I'm wondering if he was expecting an input from your side, like meaning you are ready or not, but it may also be, but yeah, anyway, it may also be that something else, something else impeded the writing of the announcement. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Okay. It sounds like it probably just needs a follow up, and I think we need Alessandro's input. So I'll start a new thread and core on Slack. Thanks, Steph, for posting the old notes. That sort of I think that sort of confirms what I remembered. But it sounds like we probably just need to ping Alessandro, let him know, like remind him that we're just waiting on something from him that's not probably very big, and I can work with him to get things moving. So thanks, Al.
Yeah, that's all I got. Sorry.
Hey, no, thanks. That was helpful for sure.
Related to the blog, a little while ago, I started getting AI to try and modernize our website. So there might be some PR soon.
Okay.
By modernize, I really just mean fix the packages and build, not the content, because it's getting pretty long in tooth. It's a little hard to keep Node that old. So there may be some Node upgrades coming soon. I think that's it on agenda items. Anyone want to talk about anything?
I mean, so humor me, but like, I'm really sorry. I haven't been here in so long. What are like the big things on your mind in Osquery land at the moment? Like, I've watched the videos for the last office hours, and then Zach was kind enough to invite me along to his calendar event. But yeah, I would love. I've been reading through the PRs, and it seems like there's Travis, who I haven't heard from in a long time, which is awesome, with the endpoint security stuff, and that's been going on for a few months. But like, yeah, what are you guys thinking about in like OS query binary space at the moment?
I'm not sure that as a group, I'm not sure we have big plans. In many ways, OS query feels very stable, and that's good and bad, right? It's used as the basis in many places, which is pretty cool. But I think, for myself, I don't think I'm doing a great job sort of trumpeting and recruiting people to it. So it feels a little bit stagnant at times. Fleet probably has some of that mantle these days.
What do you think if you were to recruit people to OS query, to use your words, like what would you recruit them to do, or like what parts of OS query do you think are the most lacking or showing their age, besides the version of Node used in the website?
I think it's a little hard to say. I think OS like the biggest risk to OS query, and by extension Fleet and somewhat Collide, although less so because Collide isn't really Collide anymore, is OS vendors changing things out from under us. Right? Often macOS land, we usually see a very slow loss of APIs and P-lists in favor of private frameworks. I'm less familiar with Windows, so I can't speak to what's going on inside the Windows space. So, we see this a little bit in terms of, the BPF work that OS Query did, that Alessandro did for BPF several years back now, is now an impediment to sort of future development. But we're not quite modernizing it. We don't have quite a way for that. Similarly, the endpoint security PR that came in is pretty cool, but was generally deemed not mergeable. So that's sort of idling, right? So can we or should we be pushing the bounds on the endpoint security stuff? I think that's a bit of an open question as well, right? At some point, it'll probably matter suddenly, and then then someone will no doubt step up and do it. But I think there's a question of like, what don't we know? What are the OS things we don't have? And having gone rooting around a lot of the Apple ecosystem, again, we're just losing functionality in places, right? Pieces are moving from being accessible to root context to being pushed into user context. And, the launcher can bridge that gap a little bit. And I'm sure Fleet has some tricks as well if they ever choose to go down that path. But I kind of wonder about how the larger space is changing.
We call it debt when you have to face the OS vendor forever. I mean, you're committed to a certain amount of maintenance work, kind of a lot. If I had to like get someone excited, it would probably be using a detection coverage tool. And a lot of organizations want to have coverage of a detection space. Yeah. And OS queries seems to be something convenient to reach for. So if completing some detection coverage space was an exciting task, I think we've taken like steps towards it a couple of times and said, okay, well, that's a lot of work, but we got funded to do it, so it's going to remain. And I don't know if the team would see this as, interesting.
When you say coverage, you mean like putting the effort into identifying, okay, here are the elements of the operating systems across the different platforms that Osquery supports that it doesn't have good coverage into observing effectively, and here's our like path towards potentially improving that for the different categories of lacking coverage.
Are you thinking like the MITRE attack framework?
That framework is I feel it's Windows centric, but it is one that a lot of people are familiar with. And when they look at it, I mean, the different platforms have different use cases generally, at least from a company standpoint. Linux is not the desktop, it's in the server. And so the kind of threats that you get are slightly different. People don't download random binaries a lot to these servers. They may be more important to monitor other things. On the endpoint, process events may be the most important thing because you need to know what crazy stuff is run. But yeah, the coverage probably has to be prioritized, as well as just looked at as a checklist.
And then related to the endpoint security framework, like what was the reason for that not being deemed mergeable?
It was, if I remember, the issue was that like sort of a bunch of what we would normally conceptualize as a bunch of different tables were merged into one. Like there were a huge number of different event types that were being returned by one table, and therefore there were like a lot of columns that were only relevant for a few of the rows. And if I remember, the request was like, let's make 3 tables or something here, or 4, so that the schema can be a little bit more limited and a user can better understand like what they're actually going to get out of events from this table.
Okay.
Carvel also had a request that maybe like each thing use a different endpoint security client and not all come in on one client as like an under the hood implementation detail. So I think that plus what Zach said, I'm sure there are comments on the PR. So
yeah, and to my memory, it's been a while since I looked. To my memory, I think the different endpoint security clients is probably relatively easy, and the splitting it up into separate tables is probably relatively challenging, because it was probably easier to just dump everything into one table, but you'd have to kind of split out a bunch of the code that was written into tables.
Okay, interesting. I wonder if we should maybe, I don't know, I'm just spitballing here, and I'm like cautious of trying to like suggest that we should do anything, given that I haven't really been here very much lately. But yeah, maybe it would be fun to, as a first effort, I could take on a little bit of like, I don't know, thinking about a little bit of this, like the distribution of capabilities across the different platforms, and kind of reading up on some operating system docs across at least Mac and Linux. Like Youssef, as you know, I'm not much of a Windows guy either. But having a little, I don't know, and maybe we can put this together with the website objective and try to create a bit more like content on the website that helps people like understand the endpoint observability landscape and where Osquery maps to, and where it's like a little deficient, and like how that maps to the roadmap or something.
what do you see the output of that being?
Like a web page, imagine you're like a security engineer, entry-level security engineer that's just started working at like a larger company, and you're like, I need to explore the operating system instrumentation landscape and understand like what is consistently available across what is available across which operating systems, and like how is that then consistently exposed to me through what set of relational like domain model via Osquery, and like where does the Osquery relational domain model diverge in a platform specific way? If this platform has more like kind of mapping like operating systems that my organization has, detection capabilities and like hooks for observability that they leverage to like the Osquery domain model. It's like these three topics. Maybe there's like an interesting way to like visualize that and also put together like an educational resource. Because if people obviously learn about operating system instrumentation through Osquery, they're more likely to continue to want to use Osquery over time.
Would this almost be like a reimagining of like schema documentation in a way?
I think schema documentation in its current form has a purpose for sure, which is like, I've got a table, what's in it? Or like, I've got a platform, what tables does it have? Or something like that. Like it's like certain kind of docs, but it's almost like the Doxygen docs, like it has a purpose, but it's not going to give you like a well-rounded overview of like how the code base works and how it's evolved over time and how the use of smart pointers has evolved since 2013 and stuff like that.
It's a reference doc. It's not an intro doc.
Yeah.
It's not. And ideally, like it should also tie together both like the operating systems are moving targets, but also ideally, like people should see the Osquery roadmap as kind of being the thing that's moving and evolving along with those operating system categories. And maybe like one day you could even imagine there being like OS SMEs, like in the Kubernetes ecosystem, there are SIGs and working groups, and they have this kind of like matrix of organizational grouping. And you can imagine like a Windows, like SIG Windows and SIG Mac OS and SIG Linux, who are each independently responsible for maintaining deep understanding of the roadmap of that operating system and how it's going to affect the instrumentation capabilities that are on offer or some shit.
I could imagine that if Osquery were a lot bigger.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
But I mean, there is evolution on each platform. I can think of examples, you know, not just on Mac, where things are changing on Mac, both like old functionality going away or changing ways that makes it no longer viable for Osquery, and then new things like endpoint security, adding new event types and that sort of thing. Well, you know, our development addresses both of those, but we also see that on the Linux side, things like, you know, IP tables has gone away and been replaced by NF tables. The eBPF internals have changed in a way that makes the existing implementation no longer viable, and which, you know, motivates the deprecation that we're talking about, and then probably a reimagining and rebuilding of that functionality, which probably then enables new different types of table creation. On Windows, I'm not as familiar with how the platform itself is changing, but for example, we have added the ability to ingest ETW events, which opens up a bunch of new table possibilities. And so far, all we've done is like process events and DNS events through that, but there's, you know, a whole world of providers that are now available there to implement new tables should we want to. So there's definitely a lot of possibility. There's some necessary work based on what's changing and that breaks things, and then there's possibility based on what's changing or what we've built that enables new things. And there's not a ton of resources being prioritized. There's a pretty small amount of resources from anyone really being prioritized towards any of those things generally.
I think actually sorry, you go, Philip.
For the eBPF item, because it's come up a couple times in this meeting, the kernel developers at my company have mentioned that a lot of the security vendors are using private APIs within the kernel, even when they're using eBPF, and that we're willing to work with some of those security vendors to collaborate with the kernel and with the kernel community and see if we can get public stable APIs that are available for those purposes. If that's what Osquery is running into, we have some active discussions going on with other people, and it would be beneficial probably to involve Osquery in that to see if we can enable that, so that it's not a kind of cat and mouse game of figuring out the API changes and those kinds of things.
I don't think that that's what Osquery is running into generally, or
Okay.
I think more the issue is that Osquery built on some APIs that were very unstable, what now, 5 years ago or so. And
Okay.
we think that there are now APIs that are much more stable. That those APIs that we did build on have been deprecated, and we think that there are new ones that are more stable that we could rebuild on, should folks believe in continuing to have that functionality. Stefano, it looks like you want to say something. I know you're more familiar with this than I am.
Yeah, not that much, but no, your summary is correct, is spot on. I can so more adding more details. Back when it was written, when the third-party library that we Trail of Bits have written to add support to BPF, BTF did not exist. So the BTF kernel symbols were not available, and so it was harder to find places to inject BPF code in the kernel where you could properly take out data, bring out data, and also have that code be compatible across multiple kernel versions with really a wide range, starting, well, back then from CentOS 6, which was not supported, but up to whatever was recent. And so what happened is that Alessandro, my colleague, wrote using LLVM IR, something that assembles probes on the fly. So it's, it doesn't incur in the issue of the probe not being supported by the kernel. However, it is tracing syscall's entry points, and so it also has a limited view. Well, instead, newer method can use BTF symbols to actually hook inside the kernel where there is more information, and also, especially, there is much more performance to be had. Like the syscall method has a lot of overhead due to how Linux syscalls are designed, where a write, you don't know if it's a write immediately. You don't know if it's a write on disk on the network, or so you receive hundreds of thousands of calls that you have to filter, etc., etc. But and so the issue was that since it was based on LLVM and our toolchain, it has not been updated since quite a while. And we need to update the toolchain. The LLVM IR APIs have changed, and the work to update the third-party library, our library, we feel it's too much for what's worth, and for the fact that there are better methods to implement BPF events.
And when we last discussed this, like libbpf came up, for example.
If you wanted to talk about the future of Osquery or where are we falling short, there are a couple of interesting things to dig into in what Zach referenced. Right. So if you look at the IP tables to NF tables change, one of the things that fell out of that is that the supported Linux APIs are very, very different. They've basically backed away from having APIs and have just said, you know what, all that was dumb. Just invoke this thing and you can get JSON back. Have fun. And there is an API and it mostly just returns JSON now. So there's like this clear shift from that data structure to, fuck you all, just run this and get JSON back. Good luck. Which is interesting because one of the things that I did see as well as trying to work with the IP tables data, right? If you actually wanted to audit an arbitrary Linux device and ensure that it had a reasonable set of IP table rules on it, you cannot do that. The problem space is too hard. You can kind of, if you knew what you were looking for, you could kind of do a thing. But like, if you wanted to, at Collide, audit any Linux device that shows up and ensure that it has a viable firewall, that's actually very hard. It's potentially unsolvable given the complexity behind IP tables. And that's probably true for NF tables as well. So I think that sort of opens this interesting can of worms around what is the target and what are you trying to detect and validate on the endpoint, right? Are you trying to sort of create some fully complete thing, or are you trying to like spot check what you have in your company? And those create very different directions. I'm sure Fleet deals with much the same. Although whether IP tables and NF tables have bubbled up to you, I don't know. But that's an interesting one. Then it also dovetails a bit with the shift we see, especially in OS X, to invoke this command line tool. Want this output? Invoke this command line tool. And generally, as a project, that's something that we have not wanted. So it creates some tension there. So I feel like that's one area that, as a project, we have not grappled with very, very deeply. And the other one, which we have talked about, though not in years, is Osquery. Does Osquery want to evolve to being a log processing engine, right? So if you talk about things like the Windows events and our evented tables, like predominantly we see customers using those to drive log collection, right? Instrument the process tables, whatever, file integrity monitoring, whatever, yes, events, etc. We see that a bit with the Windows events because Osquery does support subscribing to arbitrary Windows events and then dumping them. So we see it a little bit as a log processing engine. And this was something that Uptex used to try and get into core. I know Alessandro was playing with some stuff to sort of bypass as well, and I forget if we merged that or if that even hit a PR. So there's this question of like, is Osquery kind of this interesting SQL space into APIs? I think of it as a translation layer. Is it like a log processing thing, more analogous to Elastic Beats? We've never quite come to a good conclusion on that, but the bridging between them has always been awkward.
Certainly something I've seen come up, the log processing, like people sometimes want Osquery to be like a Beats or a Fluent Bit kind of thing.
And what is the nature of the stuff that Uptix was trying to get into Osquery? Like just the ability to kind of like watch and forward arbitrary files using the general like transport subsystem and what have you?
I don't remember.
I think what Seth might be referring to was they wanted to have Osquery log events as they were generated rather than after they were queried. So sort of skip like Osquery has code for doing pub sub with events, but they wanted to like publish directly to the logger, not publish to something that writes it into local RocksDB and then allows it to be queried.
Yeah.
It was a performance focus there again, because I mean we have seen it multiple times. The events. Well, we have seen it especially on Linux when on audit, when you enable audit for the write or the read syscall, you receive thousands upon thousands of events in few seconds. And yeah, again, the filtering or simply the amount of events that it has to send are too much. And so RocksDB kind of locks, hangs, dies, corrupts the database, because there's really too much work to do, especially for the differential that the JSON differential that Osquery has to construct to know which events to send and which ones have already been sent, etc. So, yeah.
I think the arbitrary watching of the watching of an arbitrary log file, it seems like kind of like not Postgres, not the right tool for the job, but it seems relatively reasonable to want to publish events from source as they happen with in a way that, I guess it's one thing if you want to just bypass the whole eventing subsystem and just get the events and like never have them queryable versus like running them through that whole subsystem, but also like triggering a query in an event-based way or a batch or something. No,
that has sort of been the core of the problem forever. Yes, that it doesn't feel like the core mission, but it also feels reasonable. And is there a path to tread?
Yeah. Does anyone want that kind of thing anymore?
Probably. I mean,
Feels like a way to do a logger plugin.
we definitely see customers doing relatively simple file integrity monitoring, right? It's like it's a tool that's out there already and it can just be leveraged for it, which is a pretty close to just ingesting a log stream and spitting it out. It's not like that's really leveraging any queries. But I think you also very quickly see people trying to enrich them a little bit, right? Here's your process things, now join that against the users table. So it's, we do sort of see people wanting to enrich, but I don't know how well it ever works. Like it's sort of fine on like my Mac desktop where the volume just isn't that high, right? But then people try and run this on like a several thousand user Linux server, that's running at high volume, and then they're like, hey, performance isn't good.
Yeah, and it's something that I've seen as well, where sometimes people do just want the raw stream of events coming out. And the recommendation they make to them is like, well, you don't lose any events if you're querying this every 10 seconds. You just get a batch of events at the 10-second mark. And the performance impact is non-zero to the fact that we buffer them in RocksDB, but it's also a pretty efficient data store.
Yeah, they want to use Osquery as an EDR, basically. But yeah, on the RocksDB side, maybe, we also haven't been too good into updating it. It's also on a very old version, so maybe updating it will improve several things. I recall an old issue where someone, was pointing that out, that there may have been several improvements. But yeah.
Is the okay, so it seems like is the representation at these meetings generally pretty consistent, like Collide, Fleet, and Trail of Bits? Has there been any contact from anyone at Facebook in the past few years? So interesting.
We occasionally talk to Nick, but
he's back at Google.
I think he's at Google now. At some large technology company doing something interesting, surely.
And Mike is now no longer with Trail of Bits. Myers.
Yeah. I'm at the fruit company now.
Oh no.
You're at the fruit company. Are you there with Nick?
I don't know which Nick.
No, Nick's at Google, I think. Nick Anderson.
Yeah. I'm always amused to find out who else is here, so I don't know.
Yeah, but it's sort of interesting also because simultaneously we know that Osquery is being used incredibly widely. You know, I think the fruit company still uses it, at least in one of their server farms. I think Microsoft ships Osquery. We know Elastic has started shipping Osquery and getting a little bit involved around the edges. I assume Carbon
And
Black still ships it, but like we don't talk to any of these people.
Should we? Did you hear me? Sorry. Oh, I said, should we? You said we don't talk to any of these people. Maybe there's like a program management kind of thing we should do to just chat with them. I feel like probably it's the case that someone at like Fleet and or Collide has like some sort of interaction with the larger businesses that deploy Osquery.
These are like folks that ship it in their product. Like
yeah, Seth.
almost-
Seth, I
any-
think you're referring to like the product integrators. But Mike, you're referring to large organizations that are deploying Osquery.
I guess, yeah, like I guess in some ways it would, like we touched on a few different areas of OS queries in the last 35 minutes. One area, for example, being more features, like new features. Should we like bypass this subsystem to increase the performance of this to optimize for this use case? Another is like more coverage on certain platforms. And I feel like it's hard to really know like where to prioritize effort without some understanding of like, okay, here's our list of businesses that we know are using Osquery, and here's like the person that we talk to every now and then. Here's the thing they're really complaining about, or what have you. It could be that like everyone is just like bailed on using Osquery on Linux, and it's like nobody cares about like instrumenting the firewall on Linux. So like let's just, obviously that's not the case, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that Fleet is certainly tracking that for our customers, and most of the work that we do, because you know, I'm the person from Fleet who's consistently at these meetings, but you'll see other Fleet engineers at these meetings fairly regularly, and you see contributions from Fleet engineers fairly regularly. But it's all, you know, all that work that we do is based on what our customers or sometimes prospects are prioritizing in their needs. And so, you know, Fleet has not, and I don't think, I mean, I think that's probably similar for Collide and for Trail of Bits. Like, I don't think that any of our organizations at this time have the resources to dedicate to just generally working on things that non-paying community members are interested in.
100% true. But I think we also, you know, the XKCD comic of the internet runs on this tiny little domino over here. And it feels like that a lot, you know, like we know, because it comes up occasionally through Slack or through, you know, bug reports, occasionally even in office hours, right? Like there are big entities out there that just like find this. It's a great piece of open source software, fits their needs, so they use it, either internally to monitor their fleet, or they ship it in a product, and we never hear from them. So there's an interesting gap there.
Hopefully that means that they're happy, you know, with their usage of Osquery. Maybe it's like you don't have to worry about them as much because they're probably like happy with their usage. It's the ones who are like the vocal minority of like, this thing isn't working, or like I want this new subsystem monitored, that you do have to worry about. I guess the other option is like they're trying to use Osquery, they're not being successful, and they're not being communicated, and then you have like the churn.
Optimistically, I think they're happy, and I think it's really cool that we have this like critical piece of software that is beloved by weird corners of the internet. And on other days, I wonder if we should have a stronger community outreach and like figure out, should we be engaging with these people, or does that way lie does that way as sort of like standards bodies and kind of the endless, navel gazing that comes with them. So I don't know. I find it's an interesting thing to chew on. But we're not like, I'm not out there giving talks on Osquery, which I don't think anyone else is right now. But there have been conferences.
I think Mike's right about the whole fork thing. And I mean, the only way that you can get around that, like obviously, like if you have worked in like in any of the big mono repos at any of the big tech companies, you'll know that that's never going to change. But I guess the only way you can get better hygiene about that, of people pulling in your changes regularly, is if the product is like, if the open source project is shipping things that are sufficiently impactful to the organization's objectives on a relatively regular basis, then there'll be better hygiene about pulling those changes into that fork, and then they become less of a fork and more of a mirror in some way, I guess.
I'm sure that's out there.
Really interesting. So what do you think? I mean, part of me feels like, as you say, Seth, like I think it is the case that Osquery has become like a relatively foundational part of like a lot of organizations' security posture. And it does feel like the Osquery project like could use more even like non-software engineering community effort. Maybe we should make like a little, like an org chart, like an Osquery org chart of like, we want someone to like look into like, be on top of Mac OS operating system internals, Linux operating system internals, Windows operating system internals. Within that group, you need to be on top of like, what's the state of Osquery development? Like, I don't know. And then we can try to like have a bit of an outreach exercise to try to pull people in that are good at that specific thing, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be C++ development.
If anyone knows where these other providers are advocating, there might already be an avenue or a working group that we could just join as another person at the table. I think we're relatively small and maybe don't have enough influence to demand an API. But if we're part of a larger, community who all needs a certain API, I think the OS vendors could listen to that.
I mean, I think the OS vendors are under a lot of pressure to increase security, right? So like I see a lot of the shifts inside Apple's product as being increasing user security at the expense of making EDR software a little harder. And I think we see that inside Windows too. I know they've got some stuff coming down the pike around like completely overhauling their TPM interfaces and secure enclaves.
Yeah, which seems like a fair trade-off really for them to make.
Yeah. Leaves us as a project always a little bit weird. We always play catch up a bit, but
yeah. I guess if like instrumentation hooks are being removed because the source of insecurity is also being removed, like I'd rather have a perfectly secure operating system with no ability to be instrumented than like an insecure operating system with like awesome operating system APIs, if we're like imagining a spectrum of impossible realities.
Chrome OS.
Yeah. One of the other things we see is we see a bit of like an overpromise from MDM vendors. Whether this is the platform or the MDM vendor is a toss-up, right? But there's a school of thought that is exactly that, right? As if you use MDM to secure your platform, to secure your thing, then what do you need something like Osquery to monitor it? But I think that one of the things that certainly Clyde has seen is that a lot of the things you think the MDM is doing, it may not be doing. So there's a lot of how do you test that? How do you watch your watchers sorts of things? I think Chrome OS is really built to not have that kind of problem. So I have higher confidence in Chrome OS, but we encounter people who think they have Windows group policy or Mac MDM policy that solves problems for them. And we're like, are you sure? Want to bet?
Yeah, Chrome OS Revolution didn't really work out the way that I think a lot of people expected or hoped it would, unfortunately. Guys, I have to run to dinner, unfortunately, so I'm going to have to chip. But it was so nice hanging out with you all after what feels like so long.
It's been a while.
Especially ever since I last saw him. Just continually.
Thanks for
man.
stopping by, Mike. It's so cool to see you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. See you soon.
See you in 2 weeks.
Yeah, for sure.
Great.
See?
Other folks
Uh,
have more they want to discuss?
I've got a meeting in 10 minutes, so that's probably about it for me.
I came here to listen mostly, but I really appreciate getting the latest.
Nice to see Mike. Nice to see everyone else. Thank you for all the things.
All right. Next time.
Bye, y'all. I'm going to turn off
Bye.
recording.